All right, guys, so we've received some reports that it looks like a fight's going to be finalized between Teofimo Lopez and Jose Pedraza, looking at December 10th in New York. Look, first thing I thought as soon as I heard this fight, this is a good one, right? For a couple reasons. Number one, quick turnaround for Teofimo Lopez. I think he needs that, right? He's a younger guy, and I think staying active is important for younger guys, particularly somebody who's had performances in the past that weren't quite up to level of expectation or weren't quite up to maybe the ability that he has to him based off of his mental state at the time. So you get a fighter like that, you want to keep him busy. The most classic example that I can think of a fighter that if you did not keep busy when he was younger, it was going to be trouble, Mike Tyson. Right? He says it himself. His trainers and his manager said it at the time. They kept this man busy to keep him out of trouble. All right, so with Teofimo Lopez, maybe we don't need to keep him busy to keep him out of trouble, but maybe we need to keep him busy so that he can perform at his absolute best, so that he stays focused on boxing, so that he isn't thinking about and isn't worried about other stuff that's happening outside of the ring. Right? Just a potential thought. I don't know. But that's one of the first things that came to my mind when I heard this fight was going to be happening in December. It's like a 4-month turnaround, 3.5-month turnaround, something like that. I think that's positive. Number two, what came to my mind? Jose Pedraza is a very skilled fighter, but Jose Pedraza is not a real true 140-pounder. All right, this man campaigned at 130 pounds, campaigned for a little while at 135 pounds. Now he's all the way up at 140. I think he only had one fight here already, right? This is going to be his second one. Or maybe it's his third one, something like that. But he's relatively new to the division. Okay? Teofimo Lopez was big at 135. So big at 135 he could no longer make the weight, moves up to 140. He's going to be bigger than Pedraza at 140 pounds. He's not going in there and fighting a guy who could never even make 135, at which point Teofimo would be the smaller guy. Teofimo has made his career being the bigger man, being able to hit guys and hurt them. Okay, it's one of his things, man. It's kind of his calling card. Yes, he's got more than that. Yes, he's highly skilled and he's explosive and he's got the athleticism. He's got really good defense when he wants to use it, although if I was looking at it overall, I wouldn't call it really good, but he uses the shoulder roll really well, which allows him to have some just premium countering opportunities, and he's clocking guys with these show-stopping right hands and left hooks and everything and getting and just hurting them and doing real damage. That's what we know him for. That's his thing. We don't know him as a guy who boxes from the outside and uses the jab. Has a great jab. If I'm being critical a little bit, I would say that he doesn't use that jab enough, but let's be honest, guys. He's known as a power puncher. Right? And he's typically in there against guys that he's been bigger than, which makes those power punches that much more devastating. Now he's coming up to 140 pounds. We saw in his last fight, we saw Campo take a lot of good shots. Eventually, Teofimo was able to get him out of there. But is he going to be able to get out everybody at 140 pounds? I'm not willing to say that yet. I'm not willing to say that he's going to be as devastating as a puncher. Right? That's something that's yet to be determined, remains to be seen. But what I do know is that I expect him to be a devastating puncher against Jose Pedraza, because Pedraza isn't a natural 140. He's a smaller guy. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about, we need to talk about Teofimo Lopez's last performance. Something we got to mention. And why do we got to mention? Because it wasn't great. Now, you may think I'm being a little bit critical. How could he necessarily not be great? The man got a 7th-round stoppage as his debut in a new weight class. I agree with you on that. That's a fair assessment. Good statement. But let's stop for a little bit and think about Teofimo Lopez. Right? Here's a man with a tremendous amount of talent, tremendously high expectations, a guy who goes out there and just delivers devastating, scintillating type knockouts, moves his way up the ranks. Still a young guy. What was he, 23, 25 at the time or whatever when he fought Lomachenko? And beats Lomachenko, snatches up all the belts at 135 pounds, man. Amazing performance. Right? Went out there and fought the fight of his life up till that point, and I guess it still is. He hasn't put out a better performance since then. But just fights an amazing fight, right? His ring IQ is on point. He's working with the jab. He's landing with power. He's moving quickly and going and taking advantage of opportunities. He's using great pivots to nullify the angles that Lomachenko is known for. Just does phenomenal. Now, we knew going into that fight that Teofimo Lopez was a guy who every now and then he wasn't locked in 100%. He wasn't at the top of his game. And we saw this. I've talked about it before, and I'll continue to talk about it. It was a special on ESPN done by Mark Kriegel that highlighted kind of his mental state going into things. I think it was before the fight with Richard Comey. He was like, I'm getting married, I'm having some trouble with the relationship between me and my father, and he's also the trainer, and it's this and that, and I need to get away, and I feel like so much is going on that's pulling my focus and my attention. Going into that fight with Comey, which up until that point was the biggest fight, right? The winner of that fight between him and Comey was the guy who was going to get the shot at Lomachenko. So he goes out there and turns out this awesome performance, gets this great knockout, gets the fight with Lomachenko, and ends up getting the win there too. But then he goes into the fight with Kambosos, and we see, man, he was flat. He was flat, guys. He just did not look good in that fight. He was constantly trying to force the knockout. He was constantly trying to force that right hand too much. He just wasn't living up to the fighter that we had seen in the past. He wasn't using all the tools available to him. He was going in there and he was being too flat-footed. He's known as a flat-footed fighter. He likes to be in front of his guys so he can get his power shots off. But he was doing it too much. He was able to be timed. Wasn't using feints. Wasn't going to the body well. Wasn't using this little off-rhythm type thing to try to get things going. Just overall came out flat. Comes out, moves up weight classes. And in this last fight, one of the things that was said early, and I don't know why. I have yet to figure out the real reason why. But coming into this fight, he said he had only sparred for a couple weeks. 2 weeks preparation in sparring for a guy that's coming in throwing 70, 80 punches per round. You're at a new weight class where, let's be honest, is Teofimo Lopez known for having incredible cardio? Is he known for having this super high work rate where he goes out and just overwhelms guys and blows them out? No. And now you're going in there at a new weight class against a guy who does have a really high work rate. You spar for a couple weeks. Not good, man. Not good. And I thought we saw him gas a little bit in that fight. At the very least, you have to admit that he took the 5th round off, didn't look as good, didn't have the work rate, and his opponent was able to come in there and start putting it on him. These are all interesting things. First debut at 140 pounds. How's he going to look for this one? I certainly hope he spars more than 2 weeks. I certainly hope that he's adequately prepared for this fight because Pedraza is no chump. Pedraza is not going to come in there and lay down for anybody. Look at all the wins that he has on his record and look at the guys who beat him. Right? First loss that he took was against Gervonta Davis. That's because Tank is a beast at 135 pounds. Next loss he took a few fights later was against Lomachenko. We know how good that man is. Then he gets losses against Zapata. Same thing. Very good fighter. Very skilled fighter. And then 2 fights ago, he ends up getting a loss against Ramirez. That might have been his debut at 140 pounds. Ekes out a draw against Richard Comey in his last fight. Okay. So interesting little things there. One of the first things that you can think when you see a record like that is the man's only losing to top-notch talent. That's number one. And then when you start to break down those fights and look at them, you can see some things. For example, against Gervonta Davis, look, Tank just had too much power for him. When Tank started to let those power shots go, Pedraza just went into defensive mode. He had to shell up. Even though he was using some good defensive movements and head movement and things in that here and there, it's like he didn't want to counter back. So he's making him miss, not making him pay, and that's just enabling Tank to get off with those shots even more. He found that left uppercut that was just hammering it home. And then we saw in that fight with Lomachenko, Loma was able to beat him a different way. Loma was able to go in there and just kind of do what he does, right? He was able to work those angles, the incredibly high ring IQ, the punches, the output, just kind of everything. And we saw a similar type thing from Pedraza, right? When things would get too much, when things would overwhelm me, this time it was the punch output, not necessarily the power. He kind of goes into his defensive mode, right? That's kind of one of the knocks against him. But I will say this, man. I will say this. Here's one of the things I love about him. I love the fact that when he takes these losses, he's able to learn from them. Gervonta Davis was beating him with that uppercut. He incorporated that uppercut into his attack in the very next fight. Lomachenko was over there and he was able to overwhelm him. He was able to work some things. He was able to use the feints and the off-rhythm timing to kind of keep him guessing, keep his hands in his pockets a little bit. We saw him start to incorporate that in the next few fights. Now we see him, he goes out there and fights. He uses more feints. He goes up and down a little bit more. He tries to work slight little shifty side movements here and there. All little things that keep your opponent guessing. I gotta believe that's because he knew that was working against him. So he thinks, I can use that against my opponent. I can make my opponent guess. I can keep him off rhythm. I can keep him guessing. Because look, here's the thing about fighting, right? Particularly when you're at this level. Anybody can go out there and throw a jab. Anybody can go out there and throw a 1-2. Anybody can land it with power. You can throw it quickly. Guys have different hand speed and different power and everything. True. But I'm just saying, if you go out there and you watch these guys work a heavy bag, or you watch them work a double end bag, or something like that, or you watch him work the mitts, everybody's getting off, everybody's looking good, everybody's able to land their shots. So how come some guys are able to land them in fights and some guys are not, right? Everybody knows the defensive movements on how to block a jab. Everybody knows the defensive movements on how to block a right hand or how to avoid it, get underneath a hook, whatever it may be. Everybody understands those things. They've all drilled them a million times. But some guys are able to get off and some guys aren't. It's how you set your shots up. Look, I could throw a million jabs, and if this guy sees it coming, he's going to block or avoid all 1 million of them. My success will be 0. But if I can confuse him with the timing, if I can blind the jab and then throw the right hand behind it, if I can feint a little bit to mess him up and then get it off, if I can dip in underneath, slip back, and then shoot it, right? If I'm doing things to throw him off so that he doesn't exactly know when it's going to be there, that's how I'm going to get off. That's what separates the best from everybody else, right? It's about finding ways to get your shots off. It's not just enough that you know how to throw a picture-perfect straight right hand. It's not enough that it's fast. It's not enough that it has power. You have to be able to land it against an opponent, right? That's where the craftiness comes in. That's where you look at guys and maybe for whatever reason they don't look great. They don't pass the eye test. They're not doing things phenomenally well. But for whatever reason, they're always getting their shots off. They're always landing on their opponents. When they're putting there against the best in the world, they always give them tough fights. Right? They're just guys that know how to do that. And if you want to beat those guys, then you got to go out there and you got to be able to figure all of that out and continue to excel at an even higher level. So look, I say all that to say this. Jose Pedraza is no bum. He's no slouch. He's going to come out there and he's going to look better than people think he is. He's going to come out there and he's going to give Teofimo Lopez a much tougher fight than people think he is. Teofimo Lopez is the A side. He's the big name. He's the guy who's drawn all the attention. He's going to be the main part of the card. Look, we know how boxing works and we know that there's A sides and B sides to fights, but we also know that that doesn't necessarily represent the skill level of the fighters. So upon first thought, I'm thinking Teofimo Lopez is going to win this fight. But I got some question marks with the man. As big a fan as I am of him, and I am a fan, I got a little bit of question marks. I want to see how the cardio looks. I want to see how he develops with the skill. I want to see if he lets Pedraza push him back. Teofimo Lopez likes being a counterpuncher, man. He's comfortable doing that. But sometimes that means you can get overwhelmed while you're looking for opportunity. Sometimes that means you can let guys build momentum and start to get off. Sometimes it means you can let guys push you around a little bit, right? We saw that in his last fight. He spent a lot of time being backed up. Now, he was able to make it work for him and get shots off, but that doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be able to do it against everybody. So I'm interested in seeing how all these things develop. I'm interested in seeing what Pedraza brings to the game. Is he going to crank up on the gas pedal and try and really do a high work right here and overwhelm Lopez? I don't think he's going to stand there and turn this into a fight where these guys are throwing 40 to 50 punches per round standing in the middle of the ring. That wouldn't be beneficial to him. And he's got a lot of tools in his bags. There's a lot of things that he can do. So I'm interested to see what he will do. But first thoughts, I'm thinking Lopez gets this one, but the Pedraza is going to give him some real trouble, which is why his team went for him. This guy needs more development. This guy needs to get in a little bit more of a groove. He needs to be more comfortable at the weight. Let's not throw him in here with a big guy. Let's not throw him in here with a killer. Let's not throw him with somebody who's going to take his head off. Let's throw him in here with a guy who's known, who's got good skills that you have to show up to beat. But ultimately, he's a smaller man coming up all the way from 130 to 135 and now up to 140. So let me know what you guys think. Are you excited to see this one with Lopez? Do you wish he was fighting somebody else? Do you think Pedraza is going to be able to show up more than I would say the casual fan would think? Let me know what you guys think.